Welcome everyone to interview number 21 of OWC Improvement Month. Today with I'm a Fancy Lad. Hey, oh my gosh.
Hello.
You're back again from the high AR mountains from our last interview.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes. So just in case people are not familiar with you, I think most people listening to this probably are, but just in case, just a quick intro to who you are as a player and what people probably recognize you for.
Yeah, so I think probably the most notable thing about me is I'm the team captain for the USA World Cup team. This is my third year as captain. But yeah, other than that, I've just been really active tournament player for a long time. And also, I think that my skill set just focuses generally around really technical and alternating stuff, as well as just gimmicky kind of maps.
I'm curious, this is going to be more of a beginner question, but what exactly is the captain of the World Cup team? Like, what's the difference and what's the point of having a captain or being the captain?
So I think that I'm really I guess outside of matches, I'm responsible for doing scheduling, organizing practice lobbies, stuff like that. And then I think in the match, just kind of sort of acting as a leader, maybe suggesting picks or, making sure that I'm that everyone is inputting their thoughts into, what we should be picking or, just stuff like that, making sure everyone is included and keeping team morale up, things like that.
Yeah, I think my experience has been that the captain kind of has the final say. Although I think, at least in the teams that I've been in and that we've been in together, where everyone in the team does have sort of an equal input into the what decisions are made.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of listening to everyone else on the team and sort of trying to synthesize what everyone is saying all together and then kind of come to a final decision. Yeah, that's kind of how I see my role anyway.
So I think I actually want to stay on tournaments for a little bit and then we can switch over to other gameplay type stuff. But there were some questions sent in for you that asked, what would you say to newer tournament players who want to get better or as good as you? So I think where I want to start this is how did you first get into tournaments and what do you think is the most important thing for newer tournament players to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I originally got into tournaments. My first tournament was TV size tournament 2018. And that was I just got invited by one of my friends. He said, "Hey, come check out this tournament. Some of the guys are putting together a team. We want to play." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot." And I really liked it. So I kept signing up for tournaments. Then I played in United States Cup 2018. I was invited. I was really excited to represent the state of Colorado in that tournament. And then yeah, after that, I just started signing up for every tournament that I could find. Yeah, I think, one of the most important things for newer players to keep in mind is just that you should kind of go into it with realistic expectations, especially in the tournament scene now, in any rank range, there's people who have a lot of experience and who really know what they're doing. So for your first tournament, you definitely should not go into it expecting to make it super far. You should just be, kind of trying to have fun, get used to the tournament environment, the kind of, I guess generally, God, I'm struggling for words here, but just the process of getting a map pool every week and having to prepare for a match and look at your opponents, see what they're good at, and how that compares to your skill sets. So yeah, I think it's just important to really get used to what tournaments are like, more so than go into it expecting to win or make it super far in the tournament.
I feel like the thing that most beginner, I would argue honestly, all beginner tournament players struggle with is probably nerves. Is that something that you can comment on, especially as someone who has played so many top level tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gets easier just with experience. I think that, your nerves never completely go away, right? Everyone has to deal with that at any level, but it definitely gets a lot easier. And I think that as you get acclimated to that tournament environment and you get really used to what it feels like to play in that setting, then you'll get to the point where you kind of just go into a flow state. And then your nerves aren't as bad except for when you're in the middle of a map getting a really good score. That's been my experience anyway, where in World Cup grand finals, even, I go into the match and I'm anxious before the match and I'm really nervous and shaky on the first map or two. But after that, it's just kind of gets to the point where it's okay, this is a setting I'm used to, an environment that I'm comfortable in. And, I just go into that flow state and then my nerves aren't as bad anymore.
Yeah, I feel like that sort of, there's a lot of thinking that goes into it, especially matches that you care a lot about. But while you're really in the middle of it, it's all about, I think, just as you mentioned, kind of feeling like, okay, I've been here before and I'm just going to play my best and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure.
So you also mentioned, I think one big thing about being the, I guess, captain, and there's other people responsible for this, but for the World Cup team is picking the people that end up on the team. So there's a specific question that came in about that, and we can branch out from there. But someone sent in a question. They said, when picking for a team tournament, how do you evaluate if you want to pick a generalist player over somebody more specialized? Let's assume you know their skill level pretty roughly to a rough degree.
Yeah, so it really depends on, I guess, the kind of team you're putting together. I mean, I think in general, you want to have like, you want your team to be really strong in certain skill sets, like even if that comes at the expense of other things, because you have two bans, right? Like you should keep that in mind when you're drafting a team that, there are going to be skill sets that you can just ban every time if you want. So, you can kind of neglect certain areas if you want, like, and again, depending on like which players you're choosing from, like who's available to you, that can kind of determine like, how you're evaluating who to put on the team. But in terms of the World Cup team in particular, the way that we kind of structure the US team is that we'll have kind of like a core roster, which is generally people who are known for being all-rounders. And then past that, we kind of try to like, fill in the rest of the team with specialists to kind of like, cover up some of the gaps that those all-rounders might have. So yeah, like for example, I'm an all-rounder myself, and I'm kind of like part of that core, but I'm really weak in speed and stamina stuff. So, we have like really specialized speed and stamina players who are going to be in for me and replacing me on some of those picks.
Yeah, I think the top players kind of like it all trickles down from the best players on the team. Like Utami, I think is the biggest name that people think of. And let's say like it's like you, Utami. I think we can sort of talk a bit about how this year's roster was made, where it was like you, Utami, Rectigon, and Takeda are sort of like the core, highest skill cap, most reliable, like super skilled players. And from there, it sort of trickles down. Like these are the best players for sure that we definitely want to put on the team. And from there, what are their weaknesses and who can we put in? That's also pretty good at most things in general, but specifically at those weaknesses so we can start to fill them in. But can you give a bit more insight on how the rest of the players can or were picked, sort of a quick SparkNotes TLDR version of it?
Yeah. So like you said, we had kind of those 4 core players in mind. And then we also, we kind of like scout people who are, going to be potentially, contending for a team slot. We're scouting like all year, starting even like the previous OWC, we're looking at people in that tryout, like, okay, this guy is getting really good. Like maybe you can make it on next year. So like Sawada was one of those players that we had our eye on all year. Just kind of seeing how they're performing in other tournaments throughout the year. And then, yeah, I think after we had Sawada on the team and let's see, and Kevin too, Monko2K. Yeah, he also was playing really well in some tournaments later in the year and just, expressed interest in playing. He did really well in the tryouts, so we put him on. And then from there, we were saying like, okay, maybe we have some weaknesses in like aim sort of stuff, like just general, like the ones is what people call it, right? Like Nomad 1, Hidden 1, Hard Rock 1.
Right.
Just those more aim focused picks were like, okay, this is something that we struggled with last year against Germany, like in the finals and the grand finals. So maybe this is something that we can round out a little more. So from there, we kind of, we had a couple players in mind and we ended up just kind of focusing on, that one specific skill set. And we even did a runoff tryout where we made a special pool that was very, very focused around aim and kind of neglected, pretty much every other skill set. And just had a couple players like battle it out for the last slot there.
Yeah, that was something that's really unique. And I remember we considered something similar a couple years ago and we were like, yeah, that's way too much pressure on those specific players that are kind of, it's like you gather them all around and you're like, okay, 2 of you guys, or I think it was 3 people that we did this year for one slot on the last slot. So we grabbed 3 players and we were like, okay, 1 of you guys is making the World Cup team, 2 of you guys are not. Go battle it out on this map pool. Good luck. Just throw them all in the same lobby. Which I think you mentioned that like that was actually sort of your perspective was, I think, equally valid and one that I probably wouldn't have considered myself, but it's like that's actually a good way to test their sort of like mental fortitude, so to speak, and like how well they can keep themselves keep their composure, so to speak, in that lobby. Because I think that you mentioned that would translate pretty well to World Cup nerves as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in that particular instance, I mean, we had the three players in contention for that last slot were Kablaze, Razorfruit, and Decaden, right?
Right.
And so, Kablaze has played World Cup before, so, we kind of knew what to expect from her. She's just a solid pick. But, we wanted to see, how Razorfruit and Decaden would do, especially like coming into the team as rookies. It really is about like, how well are these players going to be able to keep their composure? So, yeah, I mean, I think that part of the idea with that was just to make it as high pressure as possible. And then to see, who could hold up the best in that kind of environment. And it ended up being Decaden.
So on a similar topic to tournaments, there was a question that came in for you that says, what do you think is the best way to improve consistency?
Yeah, so consistency is definitely a tricky thing to improve on its own because I think it's more of a measure of like how comfortable you feel on things versus like being an actual skill in and of itself. I know that, I think a lot of points of contention there, like, there's not a consensus on whether or not consistency is like an individual skill. But I think the best way to train it is like, first of all, playing tournaments and just getting used to that environment where you only have one attempt to get, as good of a score as you possibly can on the map. Like, that definitely affects the way that you practice, where you should be, trying to like focus more so on like trouble sections of a specific map. And like if you play the map through and it's not, you don't struggle to read it, like you can just mostly play through it and you're just like missing on aim or other mechanic stuff where, like that's a little bit harder to train. But I think that, just focusing on parts that you struggle with within a particular map is how you should approach like, tournament pools and map pool practice in general. And so I think that is a really good way to work on consistency. And then the other thing that I would say is just, playing longer maps in general. I mean, I think that the meta still is very focused around like, really short, like high skill cap maps, which, is great for pushing skill cap, of course. But in terms of consistency, I think that it's much better to play more longer maps.
You mentioned playing more tournaments to sort of get used to that environment, which I definitely agree. And for those who, I guess just to throw it out there, in case anyone is either not comfortable signing up for a tournament yet or whatever have you, I think you can get a similar effect just from playing a lot of multiplayer. And that's something that's a bit more like you can just kind of hop in lobbies on your own time. But just as you mentioned, that I think that aspect is really the most important when it comes to consistency. Is I think a lot of people have this mindset that like, it's okay to just kind of retry as much as you want to get the score that you think you can get. So I think breaking that mentality is actually really important for consistency, especially in tournaments.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think the most notable thing that people know you for regarding playstyle especially is probably mouse. So there's a couple questions about that, but I think the one I'll start with, which is probably one that you have a lot of experience answering, is about mouse drift. So can you break down your advice for how to deal with mouse drift?
Yeah. So my particular strategy for dealing with mouse drift is all just centered around the idea of making constant micro adjustments. And so really anywhere in the map where there's like a stop in the cursor movement is somewhere where I just kind of like do a tiny lift off of my mouse pad and kind of like reset my grip, reset my aim. And the idea is that if you do that really, really frequently, then, all of those small adjustments end up, always bringing you back to kind of your default position, if you will, as opposed to if you were to, play without doing those micro adjustments, what's probably going to happen is you're going to mouse drift away and eventually you're going to reach a breaking point where your aim feels so uncomfortable that you just have to adjust. And then you have to make one giant adjustment, which just takes so much longer than doing the micro adjustments. Right. So, it's fine if there's like a spinner or a break or something where you do have that time to make that adjustment. But, in the case of a map where, there isn't a lot of breaks or, a lot of spinners or anything like that, then you're going to really struggle if that's your strategy for dealing with mouse drift. So, yeah, I think just making constant adjustments like that is really important. And as you do that and as you get better at it, like it does eventually get to the point where it's completely subconscious. Like I don't have to think about doing that anymore. I just do it automatically.
Yeah, I remember one time you tried playing tablet. Actually, that was when you were here. There was a video of that where you kind of like subconsciously tried adjusting drift on the tablet,
right?
On certain patterns. So I'm curious about like, are there, okay, so have you sort of reached the point where do you even adjust drift like in the middle of like a jump pattern or like on triples or bursts and things like that, like or streams even, like are you able to adjust drift in the middle of like a really hard pattern, or do you kind of have to wait between hard parts?
I think for the most part, like it really depends on the map and on the pattern, but usually I can find spots to adjust even in the middle of a jump pattern, because a lot of times with jump patterns there'll even be like a triple on, you know, one of the spots, like, you know, it'll be jumps into a triple into more jumps or something
Right.
like that. So like on that triple, that's a very short window of time, but that is somewhere where you can make an adjustment. I think that I really try not to have to adjust in hard patterns. Like, you know, I think another thing about this micro adjustment idea is like, you know, you can wait. Since you're making these adjustments so frequently, your aim should always be pretty close to where, you know, your like default comfortable position is.
Right.
So, you know, you can wait if you need to, if there's a hard pattern or, you know, whatever, where you don't have time to adjust, then you can wait, and, you know, maybe your grip gets a little bit worse, but, you know, that's just something that you kind of have to deal with. And, you know, it's going to be very map dependent, like I said, but, yeah.
So I think the other aspect surrounding mouse play, aside from the game itself, is sensitivity. Someone actually sent in a question to you that says how to get the perfect sensitivity for mouse players.
Yeah. So, I think it's definitely like, whatever you're playing with, I would definitely not recommend that you like make really big adjustments all at once, to your sensitivity. I think that, you know, if you feel like you tend to under aim, or you know, your mouse just isn't fast enough, you know, definitely start gradually upping your sensitivity. But I think that making big jumps is probably going to be really detrimental to your muscle memory. Um, but yeah, I think that, you know, one thing that you can definitely try is like putting your mouse in the center of the screen and just kind of adjusting your hand to where you're in that, like, you know, default comfortable position, like I said, and then just make sure that you can reach every corner of the screen, you know, comfortably. And I think that that is, you know, probably the best way to make sure that you have a good sensitivity. But that's one of those things that's just so subjective. Like, there's a spreadsheet of the top mouse players and like all their settings and stuff, and there is a lot of variance in the sensitivities that people use. You know, there are people on there who are using half of my sensitivity. There are people on there who are using 2 to 3 times my sensitivity. So it's, you know, that is very, very preference based.
Yeah, I think reassuring people that like you can basically use whatever sense you want as long as it's comfortable, but more
Yeah.
specifically having the sort of freedom to feel like it's okay to experiment with your sensitivity as much as you want until you find something that's comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. And then for me personally, so I've really only changed my sensitivity like once the whole time I've been playing OSU. I played on like 460 EDPI for most of the time when I was like learning the game and, you know, gradually working my way up. And then I got to the point where, you know, I found that full screen jumps were a challenge, and that it, you know, like I was even moving fast enough where my mouse sensor was not keeping up properly. So at that point, I bought a new mouse and I upped my sensitivity to 500 EDPI. So very, very small increase, but yeah, and I have been using that sensitivity ever since.
Is eDPI like effective DPI after like
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, basically. So like my mouse setting is 400 DPI, and then I use 1.26 in-game sensitivity. So
Okay.
it's like 504 eDPI or something.
So I think your most prevalent skill set as a player is definitely tech. So I want to
Mhm.
start sort of at the beginning. So someone asked, what rank would you say you got into tech, and what exactly made it so interesting for you to want to become a tech player?
Um, I don't remember exactly what rank. I mean, I think I've always kind of just dabbled in like, you know, unconventional patterns. I think as a player, like, you know, I always wanted to rank up, and I've always been a very aim focused player, but I don't think I was ever really that interested in the meta. Just because I found jump maps like to be kind of boring, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that drew me to tech, like, I guess my background is that I am a classically trained musician. So I played the violin for 12 years, and I have a lot of experience with like, you know, crazy rhythms and stuff like that. So I think that tech was just like, it was just a lot more interesting to me because it felt like there was more depth to it as, you know, as like a type of map, if you will. Jump maps, the rhythms are so simple. Like, every jump map is pretty much the same thing, right? It's just, the song or the MP3 that's changing. But there's not a whole lot of variance in like what you're actually playing on jump maps. Whereas tech, I just felt like there was so much more, room for like experimentation on the mapper side. And like, every map felt different. Everything was like, it had new patterns that I hadn't ever seen before that I had to learn and, figure out how to play. And I think that was just, really attractive to me. It was a lot more fun for me to play, I think.
A lot of people were surprised when they heard that you played violin.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're like, OMG, Fancy Light plays violin. So someone asked you a question. They said, do you have tips for aiming tech/gimmick maps specifically with mouse? And does it have correlation to reading notes individually?
So I don't know if I have anything that's like specific to mouse. I think that, so when learning tech, one thing that I would say is that I think it's probably going to be really difficult to learn if you start with like modern tech stuff. Like things ranked in the last few years have gotten pretty crazy, I think, in terms of like technical requirements. So what I always recommend to people in my coaching sessions and stuff is that they start out with like kind of like earlier tech, like around like 2016 to 2018. Mappers like Skystar is probably my favorite, for like newer players.
Yep.
Where most of the patterns are very, it's unconventional, but it's still pretty readable. There's not a whole lot of like crazy overlapping or, slider velocity changes or things like that. And I think that, gradually you should just find mappers that you like, and kind of, see what you can notice about their style. Like if there's certain, like mapping motifs that they use a lot. One example is like, I think Mir has a lot of snap aim, same with Realize. So, every mapper style is going to be a little bit different. And I think that that's, another thing that's really cool about tech, right? Is that, there's just so much room for mappers to develop their own style. And so, yeah, I think just doing what you can to notice like certain things that mappers will do between all their maps is a really good way to, get used to reading tech, and just, kind of knowing how to anticipate things that you might see in a map by a given mapper.
Do you have a favorite tech map or just, I guess, favorite maps in general? This is a personal preference question, not really a recommendation, but do you have a personal favorite?
Well, so I think that HoloWings is definitely my favorite mapper. So really just any of her maps, all of them are so unique. They're so different. And like, they also have very distinct like gimmicks that they follow. So if you like understand the structure of the map, then you can kind of just see like, how those structures are going to present themselves over and over throughout the map. But some other favorites of mine, I really like Halgo and Sharu. Just some like, again, like more modern, I guess, tech maps. Taku is another one of my favorites, but yeah.
Good choices. So someone did mention reading notes individually. So I guess to expand on that a little more, are there specific ways that you try to read? And does it depend on the AR or type of map? Like, do you prefer reading notes individually or reading them in groups? Or what exactly is your, I guess, strategy when it comes to reading?
I guess that I tend to read mostly in groups. This is another thing where I have been doing like quite a lot of experimentation with mapping. I'm good friends with Nathan, so he's taught me a lot of stuff about like map structure and things. So for me now, when I see patterns, like I just kind of I tend to see things from like mapper perspective, I think, even while I'm playing. And so I kind of like group notes together into like how they're being patterned in the map. So that's definitely affected how I read a lot. But just in general, I think like if you misread a pattern, you should really like go in the editor and try to figure out what exactly you did wrong, right? Like that's the most important part with learning how to play tech, is that you're not just mashing through patterns and never trying to get better at them, right? Like if you have to mash through something or you misread or whatever, you should be going in the editor and looking and seeing like what you actually missed on, making sure you understand the rhythms, you understand like where your aim is supposed to be at different parts. And I think that using practice difficulties is really invaluable for that too.
That's actually a really good point to emphasize, that there's a big difference between hitting a pattern and playing it properly. And right. I think having that sort of like, I guess, kind of forcing yourself to, I guess, not get complacent with, like, oh, okay, I hit the pattern. That's good enough. IFC'd, LOL. But
Right.
yeah, so there's a more general question that someone asked you that just said, how do you improve your reading? So I think we can, maybe you can walk us through sort of your background as a player, sort of like how your reading progressed over time and the different strategies you used, as well as the strategies that you would recommend these days.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think that my reading kind of just evolved as tech maps evolved. Um, and that's something that I tell people too, is that, I think a lot of what, if you look at like, again, like Halgo or Charu or Ryusei Aika, like these maps are, they're more focused towards mapper, like the mapper perspective, first of all. But also I think in terms of players, like it's really meant for people who have been playing tech for years, like not people who are just getting into it. So yeah, but once again, I think, with reading, like it's really just all about like, going through and making sure you understand what you're playing, right? That was always my strategy. Like if I misread a pattern, or if I, just didn't understand a rhythm or something, like, maybe I'd do another attempt or two on the map first before I went in the editor to see, like, maybe I can anticipate like where that was in the map, and I can just say, okay, like there's something weird here. Make sure you pay attention. But after 2 or 3 attempts, if I'm still not getting it, then yeah, absolutely going in the editor, trying to make a practice difficulty, develop some muscle memory for whatever it is that I'm struggling with. And then, hopefully the next time I see a pattern like that occur, I'll just be able to read it, right? Because I've already, kind of ironed out whatever issue I had with reading that one specific pattern.
Yeah, I think using the editor to sort of dig deep into like the anatomy of a certain pattern is definitely really important, and I feel like it's somewhat underutilized. So I'm glad you're emphasizing that as well. But yeah, sort of as you learn like memorizing one map isn't just memorizing that map. It's, I think, especially if you treat it as like learning those specific patterns that you can then transfer over to like now you've learned these patterns. So when they show up in a different map, then you'll be prepared for them. And I think one point that I think is really important also is that a lot of really difficult maps are basically just like, it's the same basic concepts, just sort of in a more elaborate form. And so I think getting, as you mentioned, sort of building that reading gradually is like you get comfortable with like maybe high, like 5 to 6 star tech, and then the concepts just start to build on themselves. And there's some new concepts, but they're still generally like the same core principles of reading. So yeah, I definitely agree that everything sort of builds on itself.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's like tech type reading. Is there a different approach for lower AR? Like, is all reading created equal, or is there a difference in the way that you approach lower AR reading?
So I think lower AR reading is something that did not come as naturally to me as tech did. So I had to do a lot of work, like kind of like memorization work, where I would go through and play like a low AR map many times no mod first. And again, like making sure I understood all the rhythms and I, knew what my aim was supposed to be doing, and then putting on hidden after that, like, I guess for the context of tournaments. But I really don't think it's too different, to be honest. It's really just, again, about making sure that you're understanding what you're playing. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot about this, but yeah, I don't think there's really any secret to that. Like just making sure that you're, whenever you miss something, like you should know if you missed because you just misaimed or mistapped or whatever, or if you like actually are not reading it, right? So I guess, yeah, just being cognizant of, whichever failure you're experiencing on a particular pattern is really important there. But yeah, I think pretty much all the same concepts apply for low approach rate.
Yeah, I think it's good that you're sort of reiterating or sort of re-emphasizing certain concepts, because I think they're really important. So it's good that you're able to emphasize those. I do want to bring up Gamma. I feel like you, out of a lot of other people that I know, sort of like utilize Gamma to like its fullest extent, so to speak. Especially in tournaments, I think you've mentioned that you pretty much adjust Gamma for every single map, even if it's just a little bit. So can you touch on what exactly Gamma helps you for?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Gamma, basically when you're playing a map, the notes don't appear instantly on your screen. They kind of fade in. So by manipulating your screen brightness, you can kind of I guess like affect how you're going to be reading the patterns because like they're going to fade in at different rates. So for example, like if you turn your gamma all the way up, then the notes will appear pretty much instantly, right? The fade in will be kind of counteracted by the fact that your brightness is so high that you're going to be able to see the note immediately when it starts fading in, right?
Right.
So that's really useful for really high approach rate stuff because you already don't have a lot of time to react to it because the approach rate is really high, right? So turning up your gamma all the way just kind of gives you like an extra couple milliseconds to react, right? And sometimes that can make a really big difference in how comfortable it feels to read. And then likewise, if you turn your gamma down, then it's going to take the note a little bit longer to fade in, right? Because your screen is darker and you're not going to be able to see it as early. So that is better for like lower approach rate stuff where it has a really high note density and you're seeing a lot of notes on the screen at the same time. It just helps you to not see as many on the screen at the same time. And so usually lowering your gamma all the way for like an AR8 hidden might make it feel more like AR 8.3 or something. Like I'm just making up numbers, but the idea is that it's going to make it feel closer to what your comfort zone is. So yeah, I kind of just, depending on the map, like I think one example that people thought was kind of strange was that I used gamma on Blue Zenith hidden, which that map is already like AR 9.8 or something. I don't recall, but it's like a very normal feeling approach rate. But because it's streams, playing with hidden, it again had a very high note density. So turning down the gamma just helped me to feel much more comfortable, like keeping track of where my cursor was in the streams.
Someone asked about the specific amount of gamma. Is that something you can comment on?
I don't really have values for it. When I was playing on Windows, I would search calibrate display color in my like Windows taskbar thing. And I would just kind of like it was just a slider, like it didn't have number values associated with it. So I would just kind of, mess around with it and kind of have an idea. I mean, I usually used like all the way up, all the way down, or like halfway up or halfway down. Those were kind of like my go-to values with that. And then after switching to Linux, it's all like commands in the terminal. So I guess I can say like, I use 1.7 for DT and 0.7 for like low approach rate. But those are just like, with 1 as the default value. But I don't really know if there's any like objective unit that's measuring. It's just, in comparison to 1.0, which is the default.
I think I do want to emphasize that like it really depends on your current like AR comfort reading zone as well.
Right.
I think there was a map just as a reference point in the World Cup last year. I think it was the AR8 hidden in grand finals where on our team spreadsheet, sometimes we note down like the specific gamma that we use just for our own personal reference. And I think I noted down like 0.9 gamma or something and Fiery noted 0.3. And so there's sometimes a really big difference in the AR that people use. Or sometimes I think like personally, AR10 is something that is a little on the faster side for me. So I tend to use slightly higher gamma for hard rock. And likewise, some players might actually use slightly lower gamma, like 0.9 or something like that. So yeah, I think that is definitely something that it really depends on your own preferences when it comes to reading speed. So another mouse related question. Someone asked, do you think mouse skates are worth it and how have they helped you in OSU?
I mean, I think they're worth it because they're like very cheap and easy to apply to your mouse. So I got hyperglides and I think that it just like slightly reduces friction. They were just a little bit better than the stock mouse feet. So I think that my hyperglides though, I mean, I ordered them online for like $7 or something, and got 2 pairs of them. So I was just like, it's $7, I'll give it a try. And I think that it made me feel maybe a little bit more consistent. My mouse was just gliding over my mouse pad a little bit easier and more cleanly, if you will. But that's one of those things that like, it's such a small, subtle difference that, it's not going to make you like instantly improve or something. It's really only, even going to be noticeable if you're already playing at a really high level, I think.
Somewhat related to, I guess, controlling or moving your mouse, I think is probably mouse grip. Like the actual way that you hold it. How important would you think that is? And I guess, are there certain like, I guess, bad grips, quote unquote, that you've seen that or like I guess general principles that make a good grip, specifically for mouse? I think you've probably coached a lot of people that want to talk about mouse grip or aim and things like that. So are there any, I guess, general principles that you would advise for mouse grip?
Yeah, I mean, I think that mouse grip, once again, like first and foremost, it should just be comfortable, right? Like that should always be your number one priority. Aside from that, I think that a more fingertip focused grip is going to be better for people who are aiming more with their wrists, so people who are playing higher sensitivity versus lower sensitivity. If you're aiming more with your arm, then you might focus more on like having closer to like a palm grip. Just because you want to have like that stability. If you're moving your arm that much, like you don't want to have your grip sliding all over the place on your mouse. And then for me, like I kind of aim a little bit arm, but I also like make adjustments with my fingertips, so I kind of have like a hybrid grip. But I guess the other thing to keep in mind too is that like all mice are different sizes and like people have different size hands. So like I said, I think that first and foremost it should just be about comfort, and making sure that you can easily reach all the portions of your screen, regardless of what sort of aim style you're using, being arm or fingertips. Just making sure that, you can comfortably reach everywhere on the screen is going to be the biggest thing.
Are there any like particularly, I guess, quote unquote, bad or like, I guess, disadvantageous grips that you've found people use, or is it really just dependent on the person itself?
I really don't think so. And especially with mouse, like maybe there would be more so for tablet, but like pretty much everyone uses a mouse, right? I mean, you have to be able to use a mouse to use a computer pretty much. So I think like most people kind of already have like an established grip that they use, even if that's just for like, browsing the web or, whatever. Like it doesn't even have to be for playing games. But yeah, I think that I wouldn't say that there's any like particularly bad grip. Like your grip is bad if it's not comfortable or if you can't reach over on the screen.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you are quite well-rounded as a player, which I would definitely agree with. So, and you also mentioned that some skills sort of came more or less naturally than others. So what skill set for you was sort of the trickiest for you to learn, and what was able to help you break past certain barriers on those skill sets?
Yeah, so number one most difficult skill set for me was definitely like stamina and speed. I've just always been very aim oriented as a player, and I kind of neglected my tapping, especially because I was mostly interested in tech, and like being able to play speed was not very necessary for getting good at tech. So that was something that I had to go back and really work on that when I started playing tournaments, and I was having that abused against me in every match. I was like, okay, I need to at least be able to hold my own on these maps, right? So my strategy for that was that I would actually do more than one session in a day. So I always kind of compared it to like, if you do any sort of weightlifting, like you work out in sets, right? Like you do an exercise and then you take a break and then you do that same exercise again. And the point is that at the end, it should be getting harder and harder as you go through your sets, But anyway, yeah, so doing more than one session in a day, what I would do is I would, spend however much time warming up, maybe like half an hour or something. Then I'd play speed maps for, maybe like 45 minutes or so. And then after that, I would take a break that was like just long enough for me to lose my warm up. And then I would go back, warm up again, and then do a second speed session. And I think that just doing that, frequently, I kind of had a training regimen. Like for a while, I was doing that like every day. And I just saw like really fast improvement to the point where, sometimes I would even see, improvements between the two sessions on the same day. So yeah. And then, on like weekends, I would either stop playing or I would play things that were not as tapping oriented to give my muscles time to recover. But yeah, I think that was something that was really helpful. And then the other thing, which again kind of came from the idea of weightlifting, like making sure that I was maintaining proper form while I was practicing. I think that also helped me a lot. Like when you're playing stamina, I think the game kind of teaches you to mash when you run out of stamina because, combo is the thing that matters the most, right? You should try to save your combo. Right. I think that's true in most cases when you're playing, like if you're playing in a tournament or you're just, trying to get a score or whatever. But when you're practicing, you definitely want to have much more emphasis on maintaining your form correctly. And so, something that I did was when I was playing like a death stream map, if I felt like I was starting to run out of stamina, rather than tensing up and trying to mash to save my combo, I would just kind of like let the stream get away from me. And, as my fingers started to slow down, I would see a gradual progression from me getting, 300s to getting 100s to getting 50s. And then eventually I would start missing, right? And so I think that just emphasis on maintaining proper form helped fix my form a little bit too, where I was having an easier time staying relaxed, playing streams, and then after that, that just helped me improve a lot.
Yeah, I think that emphasis on form especially is really important, and sort of allowing yourself to be okay with missing a stream if you're running out of stamina, instead of reinforcing yourself to just kind of tense up and try to maintain combo while you're in practice mode, of course.
Right.
So do you have any, I think a lot of people sort of know in theory what they're supposed to do to train those types of skill sets, but I think a lot of people feel, I guess, uncomfortable working on skill sets that they're bad at. Is there any advice you have for the sort of mindset aspect of working on skill sets that you're just way worse at than other skills?
I mean, I think in terms of mindset, like you just have to cut yourself some slack and like be okay with it. It's like, yeah, I'm bad at it. That's why I'm practicing it, right? Like, I mean, obviously you should be practicing everything, but you should turn your attention more towards things that you're struggling with if your goal is to be an all-rounder, right? And that's not to say that you have to be good at everything either, right? Like, a lot of people specialize, most people specialize. And that's totally fine. But you kind of just have to ask yourself like what your goals are as a player and like what skill sets you need to improve in order to reach those goals. And then you just need to do it and like not let yourself get frustrated when you're, improving slowly in whatever thing, is not improving naturally for you. Because again, I spent a lot of time working on speed and stamina stuff, and that was really only to get it up to a point that I would call proficient. I think like I really am only going to win speed stamina maps against people who are also not very good at speed stamina stuff. Any sort of like specialist that's focused on that skill set is going to destroy me every time still, even after all that work I put in. And you kind of just have to, acknowledge that and be okay with that and be realistic about the goals that you're setting. But also to, work with what you've got, right? Like, yeah, I have a weakness in speed and stamina, but I also have a strength in tech and alt. So, it's all good, right? It balances out.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially in tournament play, is to have that sort of one strength that you can sort of keep grounded with, and I guess have that advantage against most other players.
Right.
So you mentioned, or I guess related to the topic of stamina or tapping in general, someone sent a question to you regarding full alt. They said, do you think that full alting puts a permanent cap on stamina and speed, or do you think it simply takes longer to achieve what you could with single tapping?
So I think that honestly, I am not sure if I've really decided how I feel about this, because I've heard a lot of people say that, full alt players tend to struggle with speed and stamina, right? Like that seems to be, I guess, like it's a strong trend that I have seen with a lot of people. But I'm not sure if I think that alternating is actually causing people to be worse at stamina, or if it's more that people who are already like not naturally oriented towards speed and stamina are choosing to full alt because they don't have to worry about that stamina aspect when playing jumps. So it's kind of like a correlation versus causation argument, which, yeah, I'm not really sure, but I think that there are a lot of advantages to alternating. And I think that if you are good at speed, then full alting is not going to suddenly change that, right? Like most people are either oriented towards tapping or aim, in my opinion. So, if you happen to be oriented towards speed, I don't think that the play style that you use is going to really do much to change that.
That's actually a good point. I never really considered that. Like, I guess it's like a chicken and egg conundrum there.
Right.
So from a non-speed perspective, is there any input you could give as to like single tapping versus alting?
I mean, this is maybe a bit of a hot take, but I think that alternating is superior in every way to single tapping. Like I don't think that there's anything that you can do single tapping that you can't do alternating. But I think that alternating is just always going to be a little bit, yeah, I mean, again, you're kind of removing a stamina aspect of jumps and, like just certain types of maps that you would have to deal with in terms of single tapping, right? Um, and I think that, yeah, I mean, I just, from my POV, I really don't see any disadvantage to alternating.
Yeah, I think that as someone who started as a single tapper and sort of gradually has been transitioning to full alting more and more, I feel like the more comfortable I am just using any finger for any pattern, no matter what, just kind of opens up. It just makes most patterns generally feel more comfortable. I don't have to kind of be so dependent on starting every pattern with a certain finger. So that is actually
Right.
a take that I agree with.
Yeah, and like I think you see a lot of top players who were single tapping mains that had to learn how to alternate to play certain types of maps, but like you don't see any top player who was always alternating having to learn how to single tap, right? So
That's true.
yeah.
That's true. So I want to go to warm up a little bit. Can you touch on the way that you approach warming up for casual sessions and then also for specifically for tournament matches? And is there anything specific that you do to really make sure that you're playing at your best, especially on tournament days?
Yeah, so I think in a casual play session, I'm not as worried about getting a really good warm up. I mean, in my mind, casual just means like, I'm just playing for fun, right? I'm not necessarily attempting any specific score or anything like that. Like I'm just, goofing around, right? So I think in a casual play session like that, I really don't have any like particular warm up routine or anything that I do. I just get on and start playing maps. But for tournaments or if I'm trying to grind out a specific score or something like that, then I do have a specific routine that I use. So I made a collection of I think 7 maps that I use. I've been using for the past like year and a half to warm up. So the first map is Grin, which is very, very finger control focused. I think that kind of just like, starts to warm up my brain a little bit, doing like difficult rhythms. And also, it's not too tapping intensive, which is good because again, tapping is something that I'm weaker on. So I kind of start with that and then I move more into aim focused warm up. So I go for, I think the second map I had in my collection was Sudden Death, which is like small, really high BPM jumps. And then from that, I went into Flow Aim. I used Technical Master, the loved one. So that's kind of warming up my aim. And then from there, I kind of stay with Flow Aim and I go into Death Streams. So by that point, like my tapping is partially warmed up. So then I go into Death Streams, start to bring my tapping up to speed as well. And then after that, I have like a high BPM burst map that I use called Gamble Rumble with DT. So that's like 230 BPM bursts. And then after that, I like to just finish off with 2 kind of like general, just like high star rating mechanics. So I used Preserve Valkyria and Werewolf Howls, both like 8-star mechanic stuff that has a lot of aim and tapping oriented in both, right? And then after that, if I still feel like, my aim or my tapping or, anything is lacking, then I kind of, I don't have a specific collection, but I have like some maps in mind that I tend to play just to, continue warming up anything that might be lacking on a given day. But I do think that warm up is really important for tournaments just because, you really want to try to minimize the number of variables that go into like determining how you're going to be playing on a given day. So I think that, having a set of maps to warm up on every time is just one less variable that you have to worry about.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. I think having those set maps that you use as warm up is really, and it's sort of the way that you structure it, especially like kind of allowing some skill sets to partially warm up before you get to that specific map. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And
you can go.
I was just gonna add there too that I think that routine was really useful playing in the roundtable tournament in particular because being on a LAN with like a bunch of people around you who are being loud while you're playing and stuff like it was a very, very different environment than what pretty much anyone was used to playing for an OWC tournament, right? And I think honestly that having like a set warm-up routine like that gave me a really big advantage because I just, I was able to kind of get into the mindset of like, this is just like any other tournament. I'm doing the same warm-up that I always do. And like, after I'm done with these 7 maps, I'm ready to go, right? I'm ready to compete. And so I think that, just from watching other people warmed up, like it seemed like that was an area that some of the other players were lacking, where, they didn't really have like a set way that they were going to get prepared and get into the mindset of playing in the match in this environment that they're unfamiliar with. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting to observe too in that particular tournament.
Speaking of roundtable, I think it was Karyu who mentioned that like he was on the opposite side of the table as you, and you tapped so loudly that it was making his tablet shake.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious or I guess like the reasoning behind like how you tap so hard. Like, do you feel like it's advantageous for finger control or just like syncing your aim and tapping, or what do you think is the reason, I guess, why you tap so hard?
So I think it's not something that I like started doing intentionally, but I think that subconsciously, just like tapping really hard helps me keep time. The same way like I would like tap my foot while I was playing violin or something like that. Like it's just helping me to keep the beat a little bit more, I think. And yeah, there's not too much that I can say about that. I think that's just something that I kind of developed and, don't really think about. Like, I didn't really realize how much louder my tapping was than everyone else until I like went to a LAN event and people were like, what the hell is wrong with you? Tapping, just, yeah.
That's
so, yeah.
So I want to go back to well-roundedness a little bit. So someone asked a question. They said, if your ultimate goal is to be a well-rounded player, do you feel it's best to try to be well-rounded from the get-go to get really good at a certain skill set initially, or to get really good at a certain skill set initially and then branch out? And then if it's the latter, then how do you know when to branch out?
That is a tricky question. So I think that, just looking at my own experience, I definitely kind of specialized first and then went back and started, working on things that I had struggled with, things that got abused against me in tournaments. So like, I guess that was my path to success. I think that there's definitely, merit to both approaches. But I think that if you are focusing on like trying to always be well-rounded, I guess my concern with that would be that it might just be harder to like push your mechanical skill cap. By playing tech and like by specializing in that, I was kind of always forced to keep improving my aim just because like the tech maps I was playing were getting harder and harder. And so, that specializing really just forced me to continue working on mechanics the whole time. And so I kind of like, alongside of tech, I still was farming and, playing a lot of aim maps and things that, were really helpful for that. But yeah, and I think like in terms of when to branch out, that is really hard for me to give a definitive answer. I think for me, it was really obvious that I needed to branch out and go fix some weaknesses because I was playing tournaments and I was like, getting just owned on very, specific types of maps that I just could not beat anyone on. And I was like, okay, well, something needs to be done about this. Right. So yeah, I think that again, it's really just going to come down to your goals as a player and like, what you're trying to work towards. It's hard for me to give, an answer that's going to apply to everyone.
As an anecdotal sort of answer / anecdotal evidence that I've seen throughout the community is that I feel like when you are trying to focus so much on well-roundedness, you're just like, you take all the skill. Imagine like your like skill is like a physical like thing that you can like hold. I don't know, but it's like you're spending so much time polishing your skill as opposed to, I guess, like reaching out. Like when you're pushing mechanics, I feel like you're like acquiring new skill and it's just a bit less refined right now. And I think you spend so much time polishing what you already have instead of going out and pushing yourself to be able to play at a higher mechanical level. And I think that's really where like some people find themselves, especially in lower rank ranges from what I've noticed, where like the skill cap requirement isn't high enough for them to really need to push their skill cap more. And so they end up just polishing what they currently have, which is like good enough for the level that they're playing at. But I think if you really, really do want to reach a top level, then pushing your mechanics is arguably more important, because once you have all that skill like sort of piled up, like you see people that climb the ranks a lot are kind of specialized. Like they might get like top 20, top 10 in the world, and then start to branch out their tournament skill set. And from there, they have like a really solid anchor of like high mechanical skill that they can use to branch out and become super, super scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely agree with what you said there. Like, I think you see that a lot in like rank restricted tournaments where you'll have people who get really good in a specific rank range and they're, just dominating the competition. Um, but then they say that they feel like they're stuck and they can't, like they don't have a chance in open rank and they don't know how to keep improving because they've just spent so long, like you said, like polishing the skills that they already have rather than trying to, continue to increase their skill cap. So yeah, I think that's definitely a trap to watch out for if you are, working on becoming well-rounded from the get-go. Yeah, you definitely need to make sure you are always pushing that mechanical skill as well. Like, it's great if you have really good technical ability and you can read crazy patterns and overlaps and stuff like that. But like, if you can't aim it, then that doesn't help you, right?
Right.
You're only going to be able to play the maps that you can aim, regardless of how good your tech reading is.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned players that get stuck at a certain skill level, and somewhat related, I want to ask a bit about coaching and your experience with that. So specifically, are there any very common mistake, not really mistakes, but like common reasons why you find that people come for coaching? And I guess like things that you find yourself explaining relatively commonly or seeing a lot of people have this same issue. And what exactly are those issues and what advice would you give for those?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I see is that people just say, I feel like I've been stuck for a long time. I don't know what I'm supposed to be playing to get better, right? Because it's one thing to just say play more, but these people are saying like play what exactly? What exactly is going to help me to continue improving? So I think that the biggest thing that I see is that people just don't push outside of their comfort zone, and sometimes they think they are, but they're like it's like saying, maybe I want to get better at aim and I'm playing, I'm playing more generic aim maps and, they're really hard and that's great. But I think, with aim specifically, like, you want to be really versatile with your aim. You want to be training not just generic aim, but like awkward aim and flow aim and, slider aim and things like that too, that are going to help you. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that the general advice that I give people is, again, like, you have to make sure that you have goals to work towards. If you're just kind of like mindlessly playing and you're not really thinking about like where exactly you're trying to get to, then it's a lot harder to have that clear path of, what you should actually be working on in order to improve towards those goals, right? And then I think the next thing, in terms of goals, is people tend to focus on like rank milestones, like, oh, I want to be 4-digit or, what have you. And I think that that is also not the best practice because, with rank milestones, like those goalposts move every day, right? In order to rank up, you have to not only get better, but you have to get better faster than everyone else around you. So I think that I always really encourage people to look for maps that, maybe they see top players playing or, just really anything like, maybe it's a song that they really like that they're not good enough to play the top difficulty or, things like that. And to, look at those maps and start breaking it down into like, what skill sets are actually required to be able to play this. And then just start training those things individually, right? Like if your goal is to play sidetrack day, okay, well, you need to be able to stream 190 for a long period of time, right? You need to have really good flow aim and you need to be pretty consistent with your aim, right? And you need to be able to, maintain those, constant cursor speed throughout. So, you kind of like break those off into separate things then. So maybe you spend some time focusing on improving your stamina. And I would say that, if you want to be able to play 190 BPM stamina comfortably, you should really push further than 190, right? You should be trying to get up to 200. And then, when you pull back and play something that's 190 BPM, then it's just going to feel easy, right? And like, you don't even have to think about your tapping. That's kind of your goal. On a stream map like that, you want to be able to play without thinking about your tapping so that you can put all of your focus into your aim. Because at the end of the day, like your aim is probably going to be much less consistent than your tapping is once you're comfortable tapping a certain BPM. So yeah, I think that's just my general advice is, yeah, like make sure that you have goals, that you have maps that you're working towards and that you're really thinking about like, what do I need to improve on in order to get better at this map?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff that you mentioned. I want to sort of go through them bit by bit. So I think the first one you mentioned is that people don't sort of push themselves enough. And that's something that I've definitely seen as well, where someone is like sort of like going through their local scores on maps that they're like sort of pushing themselves on and they're getting like 96, 97. And I'm like, dude, you can play these maps. Like if we're talking like purely mechanical, like skill cap as far as like pushing yourself to the next level of gameplay. Like you're probably looking at maps that you're getting like around 85, like 80 to 90% ish, give or take. But those maps that really feel challenging, I think, I don't know if it was Fiery who said something like this, but it's like you want this sort of feeling where it's like the map is hard, clearly, but you feel like if you had a really lucky run or a really good day, then you could get a pretty good score or maybe even FC. Those sorts of like feeling very challenged, but also feeling like there's something within reach. That's the sort of difficulty range where you sort of want to be. And I think there's like a mild frustration that come. I don't know if that's a super common experience, but this sort of mild frustration of just like not quite being good enough to like, I guess, play the map comfortably is something that I don't think it's something to stray away from. Although I do also want to emphasize at the same time, you don't want to be going too hard. Like at a certain point, you can't try to like, let's say if you're I think we can use a weightlifting analogy here. If you can barely pick up like 60 pounds comfortably, or I don't know, 60 kilos, you just, a certain amount of weight comfortably, and then you try to like just pick up 4 times that amount, and it's just like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep trying to pick this up until I can pick it up. I don't really think that's how it works. So
yeah, no, for sure.
So I think striking that balance of something that's somewhat doable, but like really pushing yourself, and that's really where you're able to grow the most.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think similarly, like I think a lot of that comes from, I guess, confidence to really like have faith in yourself that like you can actually play those maps. I think a lot of people run into issues because even some people, like if they reach a pretty decent level and then they start getting stuck. And I think an experience that a lot of people have, or something that's important to keep in mind, is that the maps that you used to play that were pushing yourself, once you improve, those maps aren't serving you like they were before. And you're going to have to start, I guess, finding other maps that are more hard for you. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about as well, where like people aren't quite like pushing themselves enough, which like clearly they were pushing themselves to enough of an extent to get where they are now, like maybe high 5-digit or 4-digit, somewhere around there. But yeah, I think having that and goals, as you said, I think having clear goals that aren't like, I guess, PP oriented or rank oriented is something that, like, if you have something really clear to work towards, like that's going to really get you to push up. And something I want to bring up that was mentioned in quite a lot of other interviews, where a lot of the other people that have been interviewed mentioned that like they had certain inspirations where they kind of just wanted to be able to do all the things that their favorite top player could do. And so they kind of just pushed themselves to play those, like whatever maps that other person was playing, and or just being able to play all the same maps. And so having that inspiration can really be a good way to push yourself to like just being really outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, probably one of the players that had like the most influence on the things that I started working on was Elysian, another like full alt mouse player, who was very focused around like, DT alt and like playing just really weird like stuff with DT that, a lot of people were not focusing on it. And he was like, very oriented towards being a pass player too. And so I think that, I saw a lot of the maps that he was playing and I was like, oh, wow, this is really impressive, especially doing with mouse, with so many people who are playing with tablet, I want to be able to do these things too. Right. And so I kind of saw that, okay, a lot of these things are very alt focused. There's a lot of tech here. So, I'm just going to start playing the same things and gradually, try to work my way up towards being able to play those same maps that I'm seeing him playing.
Yeah. Was that one of the original inspirations for you to stick with mouse, especially as a beginner player, or was it just something that you didn't give much thought to?
I think a little bit. It was more so that like, I just kind of was being reassured that like you can play at the top level with mouse. At the time, again, Elysian and Doomsday was another big inspiration for me. Just seeing those players that are, able to still compete at the same level as everyone else by playing with mouse. But I think that I always kind of just told myself, like, I'm just going to stick with my mouse until I feel like my aim isn't getting better. And like, if I ever feel like I'm bottlenecked by my aim, then I'll switch to tablet. And I just kept practicing and I never got to that point.
Is it something you ever consider these days, or is it just like completely not like something that interests you, switching to tablet?
I mean, these days, like I've thought about it, but I think I'm at the point now where I just, I don't really know how much longer I'm going to be, playing actively. So it just seems kind of silly to invest in a tablet this late into it. Like I'm good enough. I'm happy with the level that I'm at. I'm just gonna kind of chill. I think.
Yeah, on a somewhat similar topic, someone sent in a question. They said, "What does the game of Osu mean to you?"
I mean, I don't even know how to begin to answer that. Like I've had so many experiences in this game that like, I've met so many amazing people. Um, I just think like, a large portion of the people I talk to on a daily basis are people that I met through this game. So um, it definitely means a lot to me. Like just, being at the level I'm at and like kind of having the influence I have and like kind of the legacy that I'm leaving behind, as like a tech player, a tournament player. Just I think that there's, so much I could say on that topic. I really, it's hard to narrow it down.
Out of all the things in this game, if you could pick a favorite, possibly, of what your favorite aspect of the game is, either some aspect of the community or something about the game itself, or what would you say is sort of your favorite thing about the game?
Um, it's interesting. I think that like in my time playing violin, it was like, I was so focused on just wanting to play music that I didn't really like to compete. But Osu was like a way for me to compete in something that was still related to music. Um, and so I don't know. I think that that was really cool, and it felt a lot more natural to compete in like a video game like this versus something that I felt was, more supposed to be like artistic. Um, so yeah, I think just being able to combine like my competitive spirit with something that I really enjoy, being music. That's kind of what drew me to this game and what kept me here for so long.
That's interesting you bring that up. I was just about to ask about the long-term goals that are on your user page because I feel like ever since I first came across your user page, I feel like, which was probably sometime in 2019, those goals have all been there. And
Mhm.
I was sort of curious to ask what exactly was the inspiration for those specific goals. And um, yeah, I guess what exactly was it that made you want to pick those specific goals? Because a lot of them are quite specific. It's like beat Bubbleman in a 1v1, beat Vaxay in a 1v1, and
Mhm.
like a lot of like, I guess, competitive related goals. But what was it about like those specific goals that made you want to set them?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the goals I set right here. So the first one was participate in and win OWC. That one I made as soon as I played USC 2018. So that was my second tournament. I just said, I really enjoy tournaments. This is a lot of fun, and I really want to kind of get to the highest level, like, the most competitive tournament that this game has to offer, which is the World Cup. So yeah, I just saw I saw people playing in World Cup. I think 2019 was the first year that I watched, and I was like, yeah, I want to be on that stage. Um, so yeah, I think so. The second thing was become known as the best tech player in the world. I think that there is a time where definitely could have made an argument to check that, but it didn't really feel right to check that. Like it's so subjective that whatever. Um, but I just really wanted to that was the skill set that I was most interested in, and the thing that I felt like came the most naturally to me. So that was really just all about like pushing that as far as I could. And then defeating Bubbleman in a 1v1 tournament. That was another thing. Like, I kind of looked up to Bubbleman as like the best, or at least like the most consistent tournament player. Has like arguably the biggest legacy in terms of tournaments, right? So, he was kind of just he was always the one to beat, right? And I lost to him many, many, many times in my tournament career. So he was just kind of like the final, the final boss, if you will.
Right, right.
And then of course, when I did finally beat him in, I think it was Dio's Autumn Singles 2020, if I'm not mistaken, then that is when I added the goal for Vaxay too, because I was like, okay, well, Vaxay is like, the next level up from that even.
Right.
And then unfortunately, I don't think I've ever even played a 1v1 against Vaxay. So, never really got to even push for that goal because he was mostly becoming inactive anyway, like by the time that I was really, on the scene and like at the level where that could have been conceivable. But yeah, and then the last thing, quit when I no longer enjoy the game. I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You see a lot of people that I think hold on a bit too much, where they, get to the point where they're not having any enjoyment and they just, maybe feel obligated to play for whatever reason. And I just, I saw that happen a lot. There's the running joke in the community about people never being able to quit, right?
Right.
And I was just like, yeah, I don't want that to be me. I want to move on when it's time.
I feel like that's a particularly interesting perspective, mostly because that goal has been there since like before you really came up as a player, which was like many years ago. And so I think like throughout all that time, you still sort of had that mentality around sort of feeling like there will sort of be a time where you no longer enjoy the game, and like when that time comes, just kind of having the willingness to just kind of move on and go, I guess, elsewhere.
Yeah.
So on a similar topic, I want to ask about tournaments in particular. So I think if I were to ask what's your favorite part about tournaments, I think most likely it would circle back to the competitive aspect and sort of environment of, I guess, competing against others. But if I could flip the question and ask, what's your least favorite part about tournaments? What would you say?
Probably having to practice the map pool. I don't know. Yeah, practicing pools can definitely become very tedious, especially during the part where back in 2020, there was a section of time where I was in like 7 or 8 tournaments simultaneously. So playing all of those different map pools took a lot of time. So yeah, that's kind of always been the thing that I guess I enjoy the least about tournaments. And why I really wish that there had been more like, I guess, sight reading oriented tournaments. First of all, because I think that that's something that I would excel in. I think that my sight reading is really good, but also just because that would completely eliminate the practicing aspect of it, right? And it would just be about like, kind of your skills as a player, not how much you put practice into, a given map.
So how do you approach practicing map pools? And I sort of want to split this into how do you approach practice when you're like really trying for that match, like let's say World Cup Grand Finals, as opposed to how do you sort of practice, quote unquote, if it's a match that you, I guess, care less about, but still want to do decently?
Yeah, so I think that in a match that I don't want to say not taking seriously, but just, a match where I maybe feel like I don't have to practice as much, or I'm just, maybe not super invested in the outcome of whatever match I'm playing. Like, usually it would just be, maybe an hour before the match, get on, skip the aim maps, like not even going to bother looking at those because the rhythms will be simple. Like if there's something weird in it, whatever, I'll just miss on it. Right. But I think that, I would mostly just like go through the editor and like kind of look and see, if there were any spots that I thought were going to be troublesome and, some of the more gimmicky type of slots. And then I would, play through the map, maybe practice those particular sections. But yeah, I mean, I think overall it would just be mostly relying on my sight reading ability, which I have always felt very confident in. And then practicing for a really big match like World Cup Grand Finals is really all about, first of all, having a lot of attempts on the maps to make sure that I have a good idea of like kind of what score I'm expecting on the map, and then also like a high roll and a low roll. I think that that's really good for my mindset. Just like kind of going into a match expecting a nice mix of, averages and high rolls and low rolls. And so it makes it a little bit easier to not be upset about like performance on one particular map, because it's just like, kind of part of the whole regression towards the mean. Like, you're going to just have some averages, you're going to have some good scores, you're going to have some bad ones. And that's just how it goes. Right. So, it stings a little more when it's on a map. Like if you perform poorly on a map that you really needed to win in the match or, something like that. But again, I think overall, just having that idea of averages helps me a lot to just stay focused, to not get, too worried about my performance on any particular map, and to really bounce back when I do have a poor performance on something. And then the other thing I would say about preparing for those big matches is that, I really spend a lot of time on maps that are challenging to read or have weird rhythms, weird aim sections, whatever. And, that's where I go through with practice difficulties, make sure that I'm, again, I really just want to make sure that I'm not ever missing because I don't understand a pattern or because I misread it. Right. If I ever misread a pattern in a big tournament like that, that means I didn't practice enough. So, it's okay if I'm missing on aim or I'm missing on tapping or again, anything like that. That's just kind of, the aspect of randomness to any given attempt on a map. Um, but yeah, I just want to make sure that I always play all the maps enough to where I'm never misreading in a match.
Yeah, the whole like high roll, low roll, and like really setting your expectations realistically thing is something that I've definitely seen you do a lot more than other players, which I think is actually a really good strategy as far as not only like I guess reassuring yourself or sort of mentally preparing yourself that like you might end up getting a bad score and like it's okay, but also being able to convey that to your team and being like, hey, I'm expecting I can probably FC this or at least get like 700k, but like there is a chance that I might get 400, and like just be aware of that if you're putting me in. So I think that's sort of like getting everyone, I guess, like mentally prepared for like potential bad performances, I think is definitely something that, if nothing else, can keep you not feeling too bad about yourself if you end up getting a bad score.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of in a team environment, it like takes a little bit of pressure off of me to get the score that I said I was going to get, right? Like if I have more of a range of scores that I might get, then as long as I'm falling within that range, it's like, well, okay, everyone on the team acknowledged that this was part of my range when they agreed to have me play this map. So, if I'm in that range, then I'm good, right? Obviously I still want to perform to the best of my ability, but if I say, low roll on this is 300k and then I get 300k, well, that is still within the range of expected scores. So, it's no big deal. Just go next.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think like we're even despite that, I mean, sometimes when we're deciding between like the last person to go in for a map, it's like you sort of ask them like, what's the lowest that you think you would get? So I think that having that information is definitely really valuable for deciding who should go in.
Yeah, for sure. And it also affects like, your roster selection strategy for a given map. Like, if it's in a really tense part of the match and like maybe you're in kind of like a do or die moment, like you might take a risk on someone who has a lower average, but maybe a higher cap. Just things like that, like that you might, it adds another layer, I think, of like strategy to, again, determining who's going to be playing a given map. If you just have that full information on what ranges people are expecting, then you can be a lot more informed about, which people should actually be going in for a given map.
So I think aside from map pool preparation, there's also, I think, mental preparation when it comes to tournaments. Is that something that you can give any insight on, especially as someone who has played against many, many titans of this game, both in team and 1v1 tournaments? Do you have any, I guess, insight on what that sort of mental preparation looks like for you and how important the psychological aspect of play is for you in OC performance or OC tournament performance in general?
Yeah, so I just want to say, first of all, that I absolutely love playing mind games with people. I think that that's something that, like, I don't know if I'm necessarily known for that, but I think people are aware that I try to do that in most of my matches. And so, like, I think the match that I actually first beat Bubbleman in a 1v1 was where I went into it knowing that, like, if I can tilt him, then I have a much better chance of winning. And when I figured out like a way to tilt him was by like picking a map that's in the same style as something that he just picked if he loses it. So there was like a point where in that match, I think he picked like Nomad won and I won, and then I immediately picked the hidden one after that, and I picked it instantly after the map ended. Like I did not wait around at all. So I think that like there's just so many aspects of mental gaming that you can do with people where like, you can like try to control the pace of the match by always picking instantly, like going into a match and just having all your picks lined up already. Like you just know what order you're going to pick things and just picking them instantly. Like that can be really intimidating for your opponent. Another thing that you can do is you can set scores on maps with leaderboards. So I guess like, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that, like to kind of influence what your opponent's going to be expecting in terms of scores from you. Like one of the things that I try to do is if there's a map that I think that my opponent's going to like definitely pick into me because they think they're better on it, then if it has a leaderboard, I might try to set a good score v1 score on it just to kind of like try to increase the pressure on them to get a good score, because it's not necessarily like it's not going to prevent them from picking whatever they're picking, right? Like, if they feel comfortable on it and they feel confident, they're still going to pick it. So it's
Right.
just kind of saying like, hey, I can play this too, so you still have to get a good score, or I'm going to win this point, right? Um, so just things like that, I think are really important. And then the last thing that you can kind of think about is like how to manipulate the amount of pressure that your opponent has on them, and like in terms of like picking things that they're not super comfortable with. So one example of this that I thought was really cool, where this worked really well for me, was in the roundtable. My 1v1 against Utami. There was a map. It was like a Kirby mix map, DT4, where I so Utami had played against Ryuk in the match before, and he had FC'd it. And I saw him FC it, right? And I was like, okay, well, clearly he can FC this. Obviously, he just did it. But his accuracy was pretty low, and I could tell by that he maybe wasn't the most comfortable on it, right? So I thought, okay, how can I have the best chance of winning this map? Because I need to be able to win this map to win this match, right? I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pick this map when the pressure is at its maximum. Because I think in my experience playing tournaments, like, maybe you can kind of mash through a map, or you can, get through something you're not super comfortable on. But when there's a lot of pressure, it's a lot harder to do that, right? When there's a lot of pressure, you want to be playing something you're comfortable on. So I saved it for match point. I picked it. It was my last pick, 6-5 before the tiebreaker. And I picked it, just again thinking this is when the pressure's at its maximum, and I know he's not comfortable on this, even though he can play it and he can get through it. And I was correct, and he like completely fell apart on it, and I ended up winning that pick really convincingly.
Dang. That is big brain. That sort of like strategically deciding when to pick maps is definitely something. I think it's a much more advanced aspect of play, because I think a lot of like the basic strategy really comes down to just picking what you think you're going to win and betting what you think you're going to lose. But is there any more you can elaborate on like, let's say you have like 2 or 3 maps that you're really comfortable on. How do you decide when to pick those maps aside like I guess like how do I put this? Like compared to the maps that you're not so sure about, like how do you decide when to pick certain maps?
Yeah, so it's hard to give like I guess super specific answers to that, just because like every match is so different, and kind of like the way matches play out, there's like so many different things that can happen. But in terms of comfort picks, like for me, I mean, comfort picks are like Nomad 3, Nomad 4, DT4, right? So those are things that I expect that I can win or be close to winning against pretty much anyone. So those comfort picks and things that I just, I don't have to, really think too much about. Like I kind of go into it thinking, okay, maybe I'll start with a really comfortable pick just because, I'm going to be nervous on my first map. So I'd like to be playing something I'm comfortable with. If I can get a really good score, that's a good way to intimidate my opponent, like starting off really strong. But definitely also saving those picks for like, consolidating a breakpoint. You really want to have a comfort pick, because when you're consolidating a breakpoint, like that's one of the most important parts of winning, of really like getting a lead in a match, is being able to consolidate a breakpoint. So saving a comfort pick for that is really important. Sorry, go ahead.
What does that mean exactly? Consolidating a breakpoint? Does that just mean getting a breakpoint off your opponent, or what?
Consolidating a breakpoint is when you win a map that your opponent picks, and then to consolidate it, you have to win your pick right after that.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that it's really important to have a comfort pick for that, especially if your comfort pick is something that they're not going to be comfortable on. That is like a really, really high value pick right there. And then additionally, I think that saving one of those comfort picks for kind of like just the end of the match, like on a match point or something like that, is also going to be really important, because again, the pressure is going to gradually increase throughout the match as you get closer and closer to playing the tiebreaker, and those points become more and more important. So making sure that you still have a comfort pick left over for towards the end of the match is also going to be vital to making sure that you're successful.
So how do you take that pressure off of yourself? Because it seems like you're somehow able to just like kind of be completely immune to that sort of like end of match pressure, and you sort of try to put it all on the opponent itself. But are there any strategies that you use to remove that pressure from yourself?
I don't know if there's necessarily any strategies that I use to remove that. I think, again, it's just, for me, it just comes down to experience. Like I've played in so many grand finals matches that I kind of know what to expect. Like there's not much that can kind of throw me off. Like I feel like at this point I've seen it all. You know, I've been swept. I've swept people in grand finals. Like I've had people like just trade break points back and forth. I've had just all kinds of different matches that can happen. And so I feel like, for me, there's just that level of confidence where it's like, nothing in this match is going to catch me off guard, really. Like, I'm just going to go in and play my best. And, that kind of also contributes to how I really get into that flow state. And again, once I'm in that flow state after the first map or two, then I'm good to go. And it doesn't really matter how late it gets in the match. Like, I'm just going to keep focusing on one map at a time.
So what would you say is the dividing factor between players that can compete at a high level versus those who just kind of win every single time? Like, what exactly is that difference between like S tier players and SS tier players?
I think it could be a lot of things. I mean, I think that first and foremost, probably confidence is going to be a big factor there. Like, if you're one of those people who's just on a hot streak, you're winning every match. Like that's something, it's on your opponent to break that, right? Like all you have to do is maintain your momentum and, to keep winning, keep doing what you've been doing. And you're going to continue being successful, right? Whereas in a match where your opponent is going into that match playing against someone who's on a hot streak, they're saying like, there's a lot of pressure on them to say, I have to be the one to break this streak, right? Because I want to advance in this tournament. So I think that, that's definitely a really big factor, just that, again, that mental gaming. But other than that, I mean, I don't know if there is too much of a difference. I think that it's really just about like, how you use those picks to your advantage, and manipulate pressure against your opponent.
I feel like that's actually a really good point, especially I think going into the World Cup, because I feel like most teams sort of have that against the United States, where it's not really intentional. It's just kind of by virtue of how, I guess, like United States' history throughout the World Cups. But it's like every team sort of feels like they're on the defense in like playing against someone who has been like consistently dominating. Even if it's like in a 1v1, like not even considering the World Cup, like you play someone like Malashevsky or even Utami or just all these players that have just been consistently, I guess, winning every single time or just being super, super dominant no matter what. And it's like, even if they don't feel like they're on the offense, there's definitely like that pressure on the opponents. So that is, I think, a really good point.
Right. And I think that, when you do have that too, like, just being cognizant of what your opponent's going to be thinking going into the match too. Like, if they're the one trying to break your hot streak and you go into the match, you win your first pick and you just start picking instantly after every map, like, again, that is very, very intimidating. And you're just completely controlling the pace of the match at that point. So that's something that, they are trying to kind of get out of that and to not let you control the pace. But, if you're just being super confident and you're picking like that, like, as long as you keep performing, there's not really anything they can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I do want to say, I actually didn't know quite the extent of the mind games that you tried to, whether they even notice it or not. But that is something that I definitely appreciate, because especially if you ask Apraxia, oh my God, I think especially in like 2018 to 2019, he was just like, dude, like every time I 1v1 you, like you just, it's like, I don't know. I just love trolling people in matches.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So yeah, that's something I appreciate. But yeah. So let's see. Is there any, so I want to ask about the sort of team environment, so to speak, especially in the World Cup, for example, or like very competitive tournaments. How much of a factor do you feel like the, I guess, energy of the team as a whole, how much of a factor do you feel like that plays in your success? Or is it not that important compared to just everyone being a super skilled player?
I think it definitely helps when you feel like everyone is friends. It's just a lot easier to be relaxed. And so that kind of goes into, I don't want to reveal too much about this, but for OWC, like we do like team bonding nights and stuff to kind of just ease the tension and make sure that everyone knows each other and they feel comfortable. And again, like just any way that you can reduce that tension, like in the comms and in the team environment, is like I really don't think that there's any way that can hurt, right? That can only help. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to make sure that you're in a good environment where, people are friendly, people are, like bantering a little bit, and, just having that positive team environment definitely helps. Because again, if you don't, then people are going to feel responsible when they don't get a good score, or people are going to be discouraged. They're going to carry that with them into future picks, right? Whereas, if you have that relaxed environment, people are able to bounce back a lot more easily.
Yeah, that sort of mental bounce back is, I think, super important. And it really, I think, yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the team environment.
Mhm.
So someone asked regarding the bonding night, someone asked, how is it watching Diary of a Wimpy Kid with Utami after OWC last year?
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. That movie is crazy. Like, how is that real?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't seen that since I was a little kid. I was like, wow, this
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah, there's some things that you watched as a kid and you rewatch it and you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I think the last like main thing that I want to ask you about, and this is something that is very recent, is switching to Linux. What has
Oh
your
yeah.
experience been with that? And I guess, is it something you would recommend to other people?
Okay, so um, first of all, I decided to switch to Linux because Monka2K tried it, and he was like, a lot of things are a lot easier on Linux. I was like, that's interesting.
From
And
a
so I was like,
gameplay
I might as
perspective?
well.
Or
What's that?
from a gameplay perspective or from a
Yeah, yeah,
usability perspective?
yeah. From gameplay, definitely not usability.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was like, I guess, I mean, I had seen that, Bubble Man has been on Linux for years, right? And he even made a video kind of explaining like the difference between Linux and Windows. And I just, I kind of never really gave it as much credit as maybe I should have for, how different it was. Um, but yeah, so I decided to give it a try, and it took like 6 hours of troubleshooting to get it to work. But once we had it working, I started playing on it and could immediately tell the difference that, that audio latency that Windows has, just because of all the bloat on the operating system, is not present on Linux, right? And so it just becomes a lot more easy, or a lot easier to sync your tapping and your aim together. But that has different effects depending on like the types of maps you're playing. So I think like just normal jump maps and things that aren't, I guess like the things that you have to be the most precise with your aim and tapping sync are like, I guess like cut streams and like wiggle streams and things like that, where you have to be extremely precise on when you're tapping, and like making sure that you're tapping right when your aim gets to the next note. And so that was one thing where it was immediately obvious that, like, first of all, I had been compensating for the lag on Windows, and when I started playing on Linux, I was like, oh wow, okay, I actually like don't have to cheese these patterns anymore. I can play them correctly. But yeah, so I think that was immediately apparent, and like I said, like it doesn't help as much on other types of maps, but yeah, it just seemed like something that was a bit of an advantage over Windows, and so I was like, okay, I'll stick with it and keep trying it and see how it goes. And I think that after playing for the last 2 weeks or so, it feels stable. I haven't had any problem with crashing or anything like that, so I trust it for OWC. Hopefully I don't end up regretting saying that. But anyway, yeah. So in terms of whether or not I would recommend it to other people, I mean, I think you first of all just have to be aware that it is not easy to set up. There are a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's not a lot of resources out there to help you troubleshoot if there is something wrong. Just because like it's like a subset of a subset of a subset. Like not very many people are using Linux, and the people who are usually aren't playing games on it. And the people who are playing games probably aren't playing OSU. So there's just the resources are very, very limited for how to troubleshoot things. But yeah, and I think that the difference is also very, very subtle, where it's another one of those things that, like, unless you're already playing at a very high level, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference for you. But there's no harm in trying, right? If it's something that you're interested in, especially if you're interested in like software development or something, like just getting some experience with using Linux is also good. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that sort of like troubleshooting aspect is definitely very like as you mentioned, it's really tricky compared to Windows. So
Right.
yeah, I think it's good that you gave those warnings, and especially that like it's one of those things that it's like it'll tip you over the like edge for some patterns, but like you can get. I mean, like just for example, like the vast majority of players are playing on Windows, so it's not like it's a requirement, right, to switch to Linux, but it is definitely something that is much more comfortable. It seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like, I mean, again, like obviously I got to this level playing on Windows the whole time, right? I only switched to Linux like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So yeah, but it also does for sure make a difference. Anyone who says it's placebo is wrong. So yeah,
And I assume you're dual booting Windows and Linux.
that is correct. Yeah, I made a separate partition on my hard drive for Linux. Um, so yeah, and dual booting has also like posed its own weird like symptoms. I don't know. So like first of all, I had to turn off secure boot in my BIOS in order to get Linux to use the correct graphics card instead of my internal Intel graphics card. And then like that started messing with like my date and time settings on Windows. And so like there have been a lot of things that are very strange. And like I think my mic sounds worse now for some reason. I have no idea. So, there's definitely a lot of side effects that I'm kind of just dealing with for that extra like 10 milliseconds. So, again, up to
Right.
you if that's worth it.
Well, yeah, I do remember you were posting some scores recently, and you would get like I don't know, you would get like crazy score on this like crazy aim control map, and you're like, yeah, this is not possible on Windows.
Yeah. Um, oh yeah, and one thing I will say also about Linux is that tabbing back into the game, if you alt tab out, is terrible. I have 3 monitors, and like when I try to open the game again after I tab out, like I have no idea which monitor it's going to open on, and so I just have to like keep tabbing out and tabbing back in until it opens on the correct monitor. And then I have to make sure that my mouse can't like get outside of that monitor. And like, sometimes I'll accidentally click on another screen while I'm playing. And then it'll tab my game out. And so, there's a lot of issues that you have to be cognizant of.
Dang.
But yeah.
Yeah, overall seems worth, especially if you're trying to play at the highest level right now in the World Cup.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's really just something that, it's for OWC. And I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen after that if I'm going to keep playing on Linux or, we'll see.
So speaking of OWC, I think since it's relevant right now, so right now as we're recording this, qualifiers just finished. I think it's the Tuesday after, and bracket stage is just about to start. So I'm curious if you have any, I guess, predictions of what like teams seem strong this year and who you might be excited to play against and see how you fare, or I guess different matchups you might be really excited to see as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Germany, of course, looks strong again this year. Poland, big improvement this year with Malashevsky on the team now and Bartik being back. So they're looking really strong. I think Korea looks really good. I wish that Tuna was available to play too, because then I think the Korean team would just be incredible.
All right.
But still, contending for a very high spot for sure. And Canada as well. So I think I'm really looking forward to semifinals, because I think that as it stands right now, at least based on the qualifier seeding, the top 4 seeds are USA, Canada, and Poland, Germany. And so assuming that there aren't any big upsets there, I'm really excited to see that Poland versus Germany match in semifinals.
Oh, dang. Okay, I didn't even realize that matchup is there in semis.
Yeah, you get Malachevsky versus White Cat. That'll be interesting.
So, what would you say these days? I know you mentioned some of your original or earlier inspirations, but these days, who would you say are some of your favorite players or players that you really look up to?
I think worst hard rock player is pretty cool. That guy has a lot of really crazy, just like super unique scores. So that's something I really like to see. Malashevsky as well, just tournament demon at this point. And also like, very similar specialty to me. I guess he's a little more hidden oriented than I am, but, really focused on like tech and alt stuff in particular. So, yeah. And then I'm trying to think of one more. I mean, I think Emmerich is the obvious answer. Like Emmerich is just doing things that no one else can do right now. I was completely blown away by his illness Lowland score the other day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Did not think that I would ever see people trying to FC that map.
Let alone with Hard
um,
Rock. I think he got a 9 miss with Hard Rock.
right. And he one missed it, no mod.
Yeah. Oh my god, that guy's crazy.
Yeah. So like I remember back in like, past tournament 2019 when like, some of the top pass players in the world at the time could not even clear that map, right?
Oh, true.
So yeah, seeing it being SC just a couple or almost SC just a couple years later is pretty wild.
Are there any up and coming players that you sort of want to shout out that you're really excited for? I guess specifically within the United States community, since that's probably what you're most familiar with, but I guess it can really be anywhere. But any players that you're, I guess, really looking forward to seeing continue to improve?
I think that if you had asked me a couple days ago, I wouldn't have really known too much. But now this Window Life guy kind of just spawned the other day.
Right.
Having a new speed player in the US is pretty nice. So yeah, maybe that if he gets into tournaments, that could be a really good pick for the US. Having another speed fill. So yeah, I don't know. I think he's definitely at the top of my mind for that right now. But honestly, I haven't really been keeping up with like the up and comer scene too much. I've kind of just, I've had a lot of stuff going on in real life that I've had to focus on. So I haven't been keeping up with the community as much as I normally would have.
Right. That's fair. But I want to dedicate a small segment of this interview to Apraxia. Can we talk about Apraxia for a little bit?
Sure, yeah.
Since he's not here. The thoughts on Apraxia?
He's a little wholesome bean. Love that guy.
That guy's awesome.
Yeah, I want to take him skiing again.
Oh, true.
Yeah, that was fun. I have very fond memories of taking him up to the summit, and he like was looking down in a run. I think it was a blue. And, it was like his first blue. And I was like, he's like, how do I do this? This is hard. And I was like, well, just take it slow and make nice turns, and you'll be fine. And he started going down, and he made one turn, and then he fell, and then he tumbled all the way down the mountain.
Oh, no.
And I just like picked up his skis and skied down to him. I was like, here you go, man.
No.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That's funny. Yeah, good times. I feel like the learning curve of skiing reminded me a lot of Osu as well.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I think it's mostly just like the gradual progression where you kind of just learn. I guess this applies to anything, but specifically,
Yes.
specifically skiing, because there's like the technique aspect of it, but there's also like the sort of like physical endurance aspect of it as well.
Okay.
Where it's sort of like there's those two components that go into like whether or not you can do a certain like a run, for example.
Right. Yeah,
So,
I can see it.
yeah, but also the sort of like figuring, like I guess this is like something that becomes subconscious very quickly, but sort of like deciding when to turn, so to speak. It's like I guess like Apraxia looking down on that blue run versus you, and Apraxia is like trying to figure out like what path you would take, whereas you just kind of like you look at it and you're just like, yeah, I mean you could probably just go wherever you want, but I think especially if you don't have the technique quite down, then you sort of have to be a little more strategic with the way that you move.
Yeah, that's fair. And for everyone in chat, Xavier was not injured, just for the record. He was totally fine. It was on a very, very powdery day, just like landing in a cloud of snow.
Right.
It was all good. Oh, powdery is like lots and lots of fresh snow. Fresh snow is really soft. So yeah.
Someone said snowboarding is better.
That is false.
Any elaboration on that or no?
I like to be able to go down runs with moguls. So yeah, that's a lot harder on snowboard. Snowboard is probably superior for doing tricks, though. I'll give you that.
That's fair. I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, someone wants me to ask this question. Consider a 300 combo map that you get 100 100s on and FC the map. What would your score be from 0 to 1 million? I guess this is score v2. But it's like, what should the score be?
So you FC'd, but a third of your hits were 100s.
Right.
So you probably got like a 75% AC-ish. So your score is probably like Uh, I don't know, like 750K, something
Yeah,
like that.
I think it's. I think it might be closer to. Yeah, I think somewhere around 700K, or maybe like six,
Yeah,
the high
that's
600s potentially.
okay. Yeah.
I think they're trying to ask like, what do you feel like that score deserves?
Um, a lot less than that. I think that the game should be more accuracy focused and less combo focused. So IMO that should be like 500K. But yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point. What are your thoughts on every now and then I bring this up with Apraxia, but it's like tournaments should all be AC scoring only, no combo, no score v2, just only AC.
I mean, I think there should be score v2 because you should have slider accuracy as well. But
Oh, I mean,
um,
yeah, but like you wouldn't use the scoring system, you would just use accuracy.
um, it's an interesting idea. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily like needed, just because I feel like it's kind of like a core property of OSU that it's combo focused.
Right.
But I just think it should be less combo focused.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. I think now seems like a good time to start wrapping up. Are there any final thoughts or opinions or bits of advice or wisdom that you'd like to share with the world?
Um, I would say please enjoy game in the style of Uruchi. Yeah, make sure you are having fun, or you won't get better.
Oh, there's one question someone sent from the forum. Um,
Uh-huh.
so this question was anonymous. It was sent in on September 23rd, and they said, "For Fancy Lad, I hope you went to the main area on September 30th." I don't know what that
Huh?
means. I don't.
Oh. I think okay, yeah, there was some like trolling between me and Loki about like a boxing match, which was not real, but I did go meet him in LA.
Oh,
Um, yeah, we hung out, we played poker, went to the beach. It wasn't just me and him, it was a big group of
yeah.
people. I think Ed posted a picture on Twitter. But yeah.
So what is the main area? Is that like where you kind of jokingly said you would do a boxing match?
Yeah, I think so. It was like the main area of some like stadium, or I don't really remember. I was paying too much thought to it, to be honest. But yeah,
That's funny.
yeah. I can definitely take if people just want to. I see a few questions that are like not related to Osu that I can answer in the chat too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, someone asked what my favorite cheese is. I just want to say that it is definitely brie. Brie is awesome. And then someone asked what mountain we skied at. We went to Monarch.
Someone
Yeah.
someone said, "Fancy lad, can you make a video on your hair routine? I want fancy lad hair."
So the thing is that I actually do not really have a hair routine. Like I don't even use a blow dryer. I just let it air dry when I get out of the shower, and I just like pull it back and then let it do its thing. I don't know.
You pull it back with like the towel, I guess.
No, just like with my hands.
Oh. So I assume
Yeah.
you like just towel dry it a little bit and then just let it air dry the rest of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
How long did it take to get to that length? I don't really know. Well, I just got it cut recently. Um, but I let it grow out for like 8 months, I think. And then I got it cut. I usually get my hair cut like twice a year, maybe a little less sometimes.
At fancy lad, question: how's your day? From Taro V_V.
Um, my day's pretty good. I've just been chilling. I went to the dentist today. That was fine. I don't know. That's why the interview got moved because it was supposed to be at 22 UTC. Then I looked like 2 days ago. I was like, oh, I have a dentist appointment at that exact time.
Oh.
That's pretty awesome. um, yeah.
Which is better, Mario Galaxy 1 or 2?
Um, I don't know if I've played either of them enough to like distinguish the two. I'm gonna be honest, but I just like both of them. They were very fun.
Demodifying says, "Are you numb?" at fancy lad.
Am I numb? I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either.
Oh, from the dentist?
Oh, oh.
No, it was just like a routine checkup, cleaning kind of thing. Like I didn't have to have Novocaine or anything. And yes, I will continue streaming the USA OWC matches. What mouse am I using right now? I have the Zowie EC2B.
You mentioned that this might be your last World Cup. I think someone earlier mentioned, or like, I think, yeah, someone earlier asked you, I think during qualifiers, if you're going to be playing future World Cups, and you said that like you're just not really sure. Is there any elaboration that you have on that, or is it just completely up to like how things go?
I mean, I don't want to make any like definitive statements on that just because I really don't know what, the next year will hold for me. I think that it is probably unlikely that I will play again. I'm getting, towards the end of my, school career, hopefully. So I'm going to be looking to like get a job and, things like that. So yeah, I think like it might be getting to the point where it's maybe time to move on to bigger and better things, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, to be honest, I thought that last year was going to be my last year, and then turns out that was not the case. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think it just depends on like if you're still around. I'm sure you'd be down to keep playing.
yeah. So we'll see.
I remember actually last year, and I don't know if this is even still holds up like right now, but you mentioned that you'd only play again if you thought that the United States would win again because you didn't want a second or third on your profile. Is that something that still holds true?
No, now it doesn't matter because I have second place course ace badge. Unlucky.
Oh, no.
Yeah, ruined the streak. Oh well.
Someone asked, talking about school, someone said, what are you taking in school right now?
Like what classes am I taking?
Yeah.
So I've got algorithms and fundamentals of human computer interaction and intro to probability and statistics and history of ancient philosophy. Those are my 4 classes this semester.
HCI, that's my major. Let's go.
Yeah, that's my least favorite class by far. Sorry.
Anyway.
Yeah. Moving on.
Moving on. I think that they may have been asking about your major, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I'm CS, computer science. So, yeah, and then I was thinking about doing a minor in philosophy or a major, but I don't know. At this point, I kind of just want to finish school as fast as possible so I can get a job, because it's really sad not having money.
That's
so
wise.
Yeah.
Someone said, you mentioned that tech maps kind of progressed through time. Should I start with like 2012 tech maps / do you have any recommendations for 4-star or 5-star tech stuff?
So tech didn't really start being a thing until like 2014. I think like most people credit Hanser with like inventing tech kind of, and with the map Miss You and then Skystar as well with, I think Dreamless Wanderer was the first one that he made. I don't really remember. But yeah, so I would definitely start in like the 2014, 2015 era. Yeah, like Dreamless Wanderer, Neuronesia, like some of that early Skystar stuff is really good. Miss You is a classic. But yeah, I think it's going to be more dependent on just like looking for mappers from that era rather than specific maps, if you will. But I would also say that like if you're still in the 4 to 5-star range, you probably should work on increasing your skill cap more before you get too focused in tech, because like there's not really a whole lot of like really technical like 4 or 5-star stuff. I think 5-star is where that like kind of starts being a thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think you get some like awkward rhythms, so to speak, or like some like very light tech in the 4-star range. But yeah, I think around 5 stars, and especially the earlier tech maps were basically like aim maps with a bit of like crazier sliders than usual, basically.
Right, exactly. And one actually specific map that I will recommend is Tokyo Funka by I think it's Pho is the mapper, but it's a Pho and Chaoslets collab. That map is sick though. You should play it.
Someone said, I want to know what the best way to find new maps is.
Um, I would say, I mean, tournaments are a great way to find new maps, as well as like, again, just like looking for mappers that you like, going to their profile, seeing what they have favorited. I think that's how I find a lot of maps is just by looking through mappers' profiles. Um, but yeah, and then also just like top players, multi lobbies are great to find maps. People pick a lot of crazy stuff. Hopefully, in those, hopefully you don't get the same maps over and over. I know that's sometimes a problem, but yeah.
So you've mentioned, I think, a couple times here that you sort of feel like you're approaching the end, so to speak, of your competitive time on OSU. Do you have any end
Mhm.
game goals or scores that you really want to set, I guess?
Um, I think I have a list of scores that I want on my user page. So I think like I definitely would like to go back and just try to get some of the ones that I haven't done yet in that list, especially like things that I have chokes on. So like because maybe part one is an example of that. Shotgun Symphony would be good. Um, I think probably most of the DT stuff is not going to happen because I don't really play that much DT anymore. But we'll see. Yeah.
Someone asked, when are you going to beat Vaxe in a 1v1?
Uh, Unfortunately, probably never because I think that guy is gone.
No. You can bring him back from the dead in like 10 years. You guys both just like hop on and just play some random OC
Yeah.
maps.
Yeah, that'd be funny. Yeah.
I also want to ask about live streaming a little bit. Is that something? Because it seems like whenever you stream, you're like really active and interactive with chat, and it's like just really fun to be around like that environment where we're just kind of all hanging out. But you also don't stream that often. What are your overall thoughts on live streaming, and is it something that you feel like you would continue doing actively, just kind of casually, or if it's something that you kind of only do like for specific reasons, like for tournament match streams or something?
Um, I am really not sure. I think that it's something that like I think in general I am a pretty private person. And it's like I don't know. I think I just run out of like energy for it really quickly a lot of the times. But at the same time, like I have been having a lot of fun streaming last couple of weeks. So maybe there will be more of that. I don't know. I think I would like to not just like disappear for 6 months at a time. But yeah, I mean, it just depends on like how much time I have because again, I've got a lot of stuff going on. My major like some of my classes are pretty hard this year or this semester, and I'm also like in the middle of applying for internships and stuff like that. So um yeah, a lot of things going on that are competing for my time currently. But yeah, we'll see. It's really just I don't know. I definitely don't want to do it like regularly, like on a schedule.
No, no, yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just always going to be like when I feel like it. But it's a lot easier to be motivated now to do it when I'm not as laggy because I'm playing on Linux.
Oh, true.
So yeah, that helps a lot.
Someone said, "What is your dream job?"
My dream job. I think right now, I think it would be really cool to work on some of the like cutting edge chess engines, especially like AlphaZero, the one that Google is developing
Ah,
using AI. It's really interesting stuff. I'm a big fan of chess, so yeah.
I would recommend. I don't know if you've been watching Lex Friedman's interviews recently, but he's been doing a lot of chess interviews. Specifically,
Yeah.
he really focuses on like the AI aspect of it. I think he's like interviewed people that are like really at that cutting edge level of, or like people that like invented some of those like AI systems for chess. So
Yeah.
yeah, that stuff's always interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I saw he did an interview with Hikaru Nakamura the other day.
Yeah, yeah,
I haven't actually watched that one yet, but yeah,
sounds good.
very cool stuff.
All right. I think it might be time to wrap up. I think you're still streaming. I don't know if you'll be streaming after this or not.
That is correct. I think I'm probably gonna wrap up my stream too, but
Okay. But
yeah.
Sounds good. Any places people can find you other than your OWC profile?
I have a Twitter. I have my Twitch, but yeah, I think I don't know, probably just like Twitter and YouTube are the best places.
Someone asked, how old are you?
I'm 20.
All right. Just throwing out that last question before we wrap up.
Yeah, no. Good.
Uh, but yeah, thanks again for taking the time and everyone for listening. And we will see you all next time.